It was a cold October morning in 2019 when Maria received a call that would change her life forever. On the other end of the line, her daughter was crying uncontrollably. "Mom, I discovered something terrible. Everything we believed for 30 years was a lie." Maria had dedicated 3 decades of her life to Jehovah's Witnesses. She knocked on thousands of doors, lost friends, broke family ties, all for a promise that never came true. And today, you'll discover exactly what she discovered that day. 7 false prophecies that an organization of 8 million people hid for over 150 years. If you have the courage to know the truth, keep watching, because what you're about to see now can forever change the way you view faith. Maria had always been a woman of faith. Raised in a traditional Catholic family, she found in Jehovah's Witnesses something that seemed purer, closer to biblical truth. It was 1989 when they first knocked on her door, and Maria remembers to this day the feeling of relief she felt when hearing about the earthly paradise that was to come. "You're not going to die, Maria," said Brother Roberto, a respected elder from the local congregation. "Armageddon is near, perhaps in just a few years. You'll see the new world with your own eyes." These were words that warmed the heart of a single mother of 2 children, struggling to survive in hostile 1990s São Paulo. But what Maria didn't know is that this same promise had been made to millions of people over a century ago. The first false prophecy Maria discovered was the one that shook the foundations of her faith. In 1879, Charles Taze Russell, founder of what would later become Jehovah's Witnesses, made a declaration that would echo for decades. Christ will return invisibly in 1874, and the end of the Gentile times will be in 1914. In the July 1879 issue of The Watchtower, Russell wrote, "The times of the Gentiles will end in 1914, and the earthly kingdoms will be completely destroyed." Maria discovered that when 1914 came and the world didn't end, the organization simply changed the interpretation. Now they said that Jesus had begun reigning invisibly in heaven in 1914, a convenient explanation for a glaring prophetic failure. But this was just the first of 7 carefully hidden lies. Maria's second discovery was even more shocking. In 1918, Russell's successor, Judge Joseph Franklin Rutherford, made an even more specific prophecy. In the 1920 publication, "Millions Now Living Will Never Die," Rutherford categorically declared, "We can confidently expect that 1925 will mark the return of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the faithful prophets of old, to the condition of human perfection." Rutherford was so convinced of this prophecy that he had a mansion built in San Diego, California, called Beth Sarim, House of the Princes, specifically to house these biblical patriarchs when they resurrected in 1925. When 1925 passed and no patriarch appeared, Rutherford lived comfortably in the mansion until his death in 1942. The organization later sold the property quietly, hoping everyone would forget this embarrassing prophecy. Maria felt her stomach churn when she first read about Beth Sarim. How was it possible that an organization that called itself God's Channel could err so grotesquely? The third revelation almost made Maria faint. In September 1941, just months before the United States entered World War II, the Watchtower published an article with the provocative title, "Children." In this article, the organization explicitly discouraged witnesses from marrying or having children because the end was only months, not years away. The text said, "Would it be scripturally proper for them to now marry and begin to rear children? No, is the answer, which is supported by Scripture. The end of this world is so near that it would be a matter of only a few months, not years." Maria thought of all the couples she knew in the congregation who had postponed family dreams for decades, faithfully following this guidance. How many women lost the chance to be mothers? How many men died alone, waiting for a paradise that never came? The organization never apologized for stealing these life opportunities from their most devoted followers. The fourth false prophecy was the one that touched Maria most personally. In 1966, the Watchtower Society released the book Life Everlasting in Freedom of the Sons of God, where they calculated that Armageddon would come in 1975 based on biblical chronology and the belief that humanity had lived 6,000 years since Adam. The expectation was so great that thousands of witnesses sold their homes, left stable jobs, cancelled retirement plans. Some even stopped paying taxes. At assemblies around the world, elder after elder took the stage declaring, "We don't need to worry about 1976 because it won't come." Maria remembered her mother-in-law, Donna Concepcion, who had sold the small apartment she bought with a lifetime of savings, distributing the money for preaching, because in the new world we wouldn't need money anyway. When 1975 passed and nothing happened, the organization blamed their own followers for having wrong expectations, claiming they had never set a specific date. But Maria had found the original publications, the audio tapes from assemblies, the irrefutable evidence. Donna Concepcion died in 2003 at age 89, poor and still waiting for a promise that never came true. The fifth lie Maria discovered was perhaps the cruelest of all. For decades, the organization taught that the generation that saw the events of 1914 would not pass away before the end of the world came. This doctrine was based on Jesus' words in Matthew 24:34, "This generation will not pass away until all these things happen." In 1984, in the May 15th issue of The Watchtower, the organization wrote, "If Jesus used generation in that sense, and we apply it to the 20th century's first generation, then the babies of that generation are now about 70 years old, and others born later in that generation are now less than 70. Some of them will by no means pass away before the end of this system comes." The problem is that all these people died. When it became clear that the 1914 generation was dying out without the end coming, the organization quietly changed the definition of generation not once, but several times. First, they said generation referred to the anointed who were alive in 1914, then that it referred to people over 15 in 1914. Finally, they created the doctrine of overlapping generations, an interpretation so confusing that not even the elders themselves can explain it properly. Maria realized she was facing an organization willing to change any doctrine to hide their prophetic errors. The sixth false prophecy Maria discovered was more subtle but no less devastating. In the 1990s, when the entire world was preparing for the year 2000, Jehovah's Witnesses publications began to hint that the new millennium could bring significant developments in God's purpose. Although they were careful not to make direct statements after previous failures, the language used in publications created a clear expectation. In the January 15th, 2000 issue of The Watchtower, they wrote, "Will the entry into the third millennium mark the beginning of something grand in Jehovah's purpose? Time will tell." Thousands of witnesses around the world further reduced their investments in education and careers, hoping that the year 2000 would bring the promised end. Entire families planned their lives around this subtle but powerful expectation. When nothing happened, the organization simply stopped mentioning these hints, as if they had never been made. The seventh and final false prophecy Maria discovered was the most disturbing of all, the one still being preached today. Since 2014, celebrating 100 years of Christ's kingdom, the organization has intensified its rhetoric about the end being very, very close. In videos, conventions, and publications, organization leaders use phrases like, "within our lifetime," "a matter of moments," "in the last of the last days." At the 2019 regional convention, a member of the governing body even said, "Brothers, can you feel it in the air? The end is so close we can almost touch it." Maria realized this is the same language her organization has been using for 150 years. The same promises, the same expectations, the same manipulated hopes, generation after generation. When Maria finished reading the documents her daughter had compiled, copies of old publications, recordings of speeches, screenshots of doctrinal changes, she felt something break inside her chest. It wasn't just disappointment. It was the deep pain of realizing she had dedicated 30 years of her life to an organization that systematically lied to its followers. She thought of all the birthdays she didn't celebrate, the blood transfusions she refused, the friendships she lost, the dreams she postponed. She thought of the millions of people around the world who, like her, had built their entire lives around empty promises. But more painful than all of this was the realization that the organization knew. They knew their prophecies had failed. They knew they were changing doctrines to hide errors. They knew they were manipulating the hope of vulnerable people. And they continued doing this decade after decade without ever apologizing or taking responsibility. Maria also discovered how the organization deals with those who question these false prophecies. Internal documents reveal a systematic policy of disfellowshipping members who ask dangerous questions, labeling legitimate questioning as apostasy, prohibiting independent historical research, destroying or altering embarrassing documents, and training elders to discourage excessive research. In a confidential circular letter to elders from 1980, the organization instructed, "When brothers ask questions about past prophecies or doctrinal changes, remind them that the light gets brighter and that questioning the organization is questioning Jehovah." Maria realized she had discovered not just false prophecies, but an entire system built to hide these false prophecies. When Maria hung up the phone after that conversation with her daughter, she looked around her living room. The Watchtower magazines carefully stacked, the organization's books lined up on the shelf, the convention photos scattered on the wall. Everything that had been her life for 3 decades suddenly seemed false, empty, like the set of a theater where she had been just an actress playing a role. She remembered Jesus' words in Matthew 7:15, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves." 150 years of false prophecies, 7 major documented lies, millions of lives affected, and everything hidden under doctrinal changes and new light. Today, Maria no longer attends the Kingdom Hall. She lost almost all the friends she had made in 30 years because the organization prohibits its members from maintaining contact with apostates. But she says she has never felt closer to God. "I discovered," she told me one Sunday afternoon, "that seeking truth sometimes means accepting that we were deceived. And that true faith is not afraid of difficult questions." The 7 false prophecies you learned about today are just the tip of the iceberg. These are 150 years of an organization that presents itself as God's exclusive channel, but has a prophetic track record worse than any television psychic. The question that remains is, if an organization systematically fails in its most important prophecies for over a century, what credibility does it have to guide your spiritual life? Jesus said in Deuteronomy 18:22, "When the prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, and that word does not come to pass or come true, that is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You need not be afraid of him." Maria found her answer. And you? If this story touched you in some way, if you recognize your own journey in Maria's story, or if you have a loved one who needs to know these truths, leave a comment below. Share your own experience, your doubts, your discoveries. And if you had the courage to watch this far, to face uncomfortable truths and question what you've always believed, then you're ready for more revelations. Subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, because in the coming weeks we'll explore even more secrets that religious organizations prefer to keep hidden. Remember, truth can be painful, but it always sets you free. And sometimes questioning what we were taught is the first step toward a more mature and genuine faith. You had the courage to reach the end of this video. Now, how about having the courage to share this truth with those you love?